I visibly saw someone reduced to an absolute puddle of terror was the guy sitting next to me at the Blair Witch Project, who ended the film with his hands sort of up in front of his face. His face was red with terror, and he was suddenly speaking in a very high-pitched, very rapid voice. And had just been traumatized by the movie we had just seen, so I thought that was pretty nice. That's the question that people have been wrestling with since horror movies appeared, and I guess arguably before that, since the arrival of horror literature. Stephen King has said, why do people pay good money to be made extremely uncomfortable? Right? And there's been various theories, the roller coaster theory, that we get the thrill of something like that, or as I think David Cronenberg has suggested, it's our encounter with death up on the screen where things aren't irrevocable. Others have suggested that it's it's curiosity. We're able to delve into deep questions and of life and death and so on. I think there may be elements of all of these different approaches that are at play. They also tend to speak to our anxieties. Like it's not just our curiosity, but what we're afraid of, and we seem to want to confront these fears, sometimes in a disguised form, but sometimes very directly. Well, it's certainly a fixture of our popular culture. Its fortunes rise and fall. It's dominant at some periods, sometimes less so at others. We're currently in quite the flowering of the horror film. It's currently, I believe, the most profitable genre going. Really? The films are very cheap to make, and Get Out, for example, made back something like 60 times its budget. So the blockbuster superhero films can only dream of that kind of profitability. So it has a role to play, certainly. Well, in any form of popular culture does. Exactly what that role is that's the subject of debate. But I have to say, I was very struck this past year when I saw Arrival and Get Out within months of each other. Really? And well, of course, one very different films, one science fiction, one horror, but Arrival, in its optimism, felt like the last movie of the Obama era, and Get Out felt like the first movie of the Trump era, even though they were both made in 2016. I think just speaking broadly, a film that knows exactly what it wants to do, which pressure points it wants to hit in the audience, then whether that film is something as literate as The Witch, as merciless as Martyrs, they're going to have very different approaches, and one isn't necessarily more valid than the other. So some people will get tired, for instance, of, say, an over-reliance on jump scares, but a carefully deployed jump scare can be absolutely brilliant. The gore without thought won't have any effect, but intelligent gore can be absolutely devastating. So all of this comes down to, I suppose, the filmmakers being aware of exactly what they are doing. Does the author understand the tools at play, or the tools that they are using for the ends that they have in mind? And so of course, horror is so subjective, so that what will work for one reader won't work for another. But I think of something like Lucy Taylor's Making the Woman. It's an absolute, that short story is like a scalpel to the jugular, and in very compact, very absolutely merciless in its delivery. And it certainly is a story that needs all of the explicit violence that it contains in order to have its full impact. But other stories, you will need to be a lot more subtle. It's my tribute to the haunted house form, and so heavily influenced by things like Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House, and Stephen King's The Shining would be sort of two, but particularly The Haunting of Hill House, I think as it's kind of the Mount Everest of horror story, of haunted house stories, and the genesis was thinking also the very, very classic, almost hoary cliche of the group of investigators who come to a haunted house to find out if it's real or not. Richard Matheson's The Legend of Hell House would be another key work there, and so the classic split will be between the believers and the non-believers, and the question I asked myself, well, it was what if they're both wrong, and if they're both wrong, what is the truth there? And so my challenge to myself was to come up with a truth that would be more awful than either the believers or the skeptics could conceive of and deal with. I tend to gravitate towards some older films there, going for the spook factor. One of the movies that has become almost a standard for me to watch on Halloween is The Creeping Flesh. This is a film, it wasn't a Hammer movie, but it was in the vein of a Hammer film. So we have Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, it takes place in the first part of the century, and we have this giant skeleton which turns out to be the embodiment of evil, and the flesh gradually reforming over this thing, and it's a wonderful Gothic exercise. I have to say, I'm really keen to sit down and watch The Witch again, maybe this Halloween if I get the chance, because I think that was a truly wonderful work, and it's got the right level of spook factor, I think, for the season.